She was just logistics. No rank, no recognition, no one taking her seriously. Until the day Amelia Hart picked up a rifle and erased every doubt in Dry Creek Valley. One shot, one legend reborn. They didn't think I was serious when I took the rifle. Careful there, Amelia. That thing's got more kick than you've ever felt in your life. The jokes rolled off their tongues as naturally as breathing. I stood silent, letting them laugh. To them, I wasn't a soldier, at least not in the way that mattered. My name wasn't even on the range schedule. I was logistics support, stamped with an observer's badge and told to keep my head down. My uniform bore no patches, no stripes, no visible history. Just a clipboard, a pen, and the kind of ponytail people mistake for compliance. We were in Dry Creek Valley, a brutal patch of desert outside Reno, Nevada. Recon elites used it for advanced evaluations. Wind tunnels between cliffs, heat waves shimmering off stone, distances designed to humble even the proudest sharpshooter. On that particular day, the range was crowded with ego and wagers. Every man there thought himself a gunslinger. One of them, an older spotter with sun-leathered skin, handed me the rifle like he was setting up a punchline. A massive M110, 50 caliber sniper system, polished and heavy, the kind that left bruises if you didn't know what you were doing. Something for the scrapbook, he said with a smirk. Hold it tight. Kicks a little worse than your hairdryer. More laughter. I said nothing. Instead, I lowered myself onto the mat, balancing the beast with practiced ease. Their chuckles grew louder. To them, I was play-acting. First time seeing real hardware up close. One of them pressed, leaning over my shoulder. I tilted my head slightly and answered in the calmest tone I could manage. I've seen what I needed to. They assumed that meant I was tuning out their nonsense. But what I was really doing was listening. Mapping how the wind twisted through the valley, bouncing off rock faces. Noticing the rhythm of the gusts, how it rose, dipped, then paused for a fleeting instant like the desert itself was holding its breath. I shifted position, sliding 10 feet to the left. No hesitation. No words. Just movement. That's when the laughter softened. Why'd she move? One muttered. The older spotter narrowed his eyes, suddenly less amused. That's the windbreak line. She's reading the slope. I didn't need to confirm it. My hands worked quickly, setting the bipod with precision, adjusting the scope without once putting my eye to it. The valley spoke in echoes and dust swirls, and I had learned to listen. Someone fed a round into the chamber for me, still smirking. Let's see if you even know where the trigger is. I settled into prone, my body aligning with the rifle as if we'd done this 1,000 times. The target, a steel plate buried in brush nearly 200 yards out, waited. No one bothered giving me a readout. They didn't think I'd even pull the trigger. But I was already following the sound. The desert's breath. I exhaled, slow and steady. My finger rested gently against the trigger, not pressing, just waiting. The wind paused. 2 seconds. A silence no one else caught. I squeezed. The rifle thundered, recoil slamming back with enough force to stagger most first-timers. I absorbed it cleanly. The round tore across the valley, vanishing into the haze. A heartbeat later, the steel target sang with a perfect center strike. The laughter was gone. The spotter fumbled with his tablet, checking readings twice, 3 times. No drift. Dead center. That's impossible. I stood, handed the rifle back as if it were nothing more than borrowed gear. Thanks, I said simply. Their eyes followed me like I was something they couldn't name. And maybe they were right. They were still staring at me when I walked off the firing line. No one reached for the rifle I left behind. Not a single one of those men, who only minutes earlier had been laughing and trading bets, dared to pick it up again. The steel plate in the distance gleamed faintly under the Nevada sun, scarred by one mark and one mark only, my shot. I could feel their confusion trailing after me, even though I didn't look back. A younger sniper finally broke the silence. That wasn't luck. She timed that shot. The older spotter whispered, almost to himself. She used sound. The echoes. Nobody teaches that. I kept walking toward the gear shed, clipboard still tucked under my arm like the disguise it was meant to be. My boots crunched against the gravel with slow, deliberate rhythm. Inside, my heart wasn't racing. It hadn't in years. By the time I reached the lockers, I could hear the hushed voices behind me. Someone had started digging through the personnel network. I knew what they'd find, or rather, what they wouldn't. Files redacted to uselessness. Pages of black bars. Not much more than a name. Amelia Hart. Logistics. Observer. Non-combat assignment. But if they pushed harder, if they knew which restricted clearance to burn, they'd see fragments of what lay beneath. Snippets from operations that didn't officially exist. Numbers scratched beside places most people only read about in briefings. One word they might stumble on. Wraithline. It wasn't a unit. Not in the traditional sense. More like a shadow trail. A thread pulled through operations where precision mattered more than numbers. I'd carried that thread once. Carried it until it frayed me thin. 4 years ago, I buried it. Or maybe command buried me, depending on how you wanted to see it. Either way, Amelia Hart stopped existing as a sniper. They handed me a clipboard and told me to keep my head down. Safer that way, for everyone. But standing out there on Dry Creek Valley's line, with that rifle in my hands, it didn't feel like something I could bury anymore. I unlocked my own gear case. The leather was cracked, the hinges scuffed from too many deployments. Inside lay the one piece of me no paperwork could erase. My rifle. Not government-issued anymore. Custom build. Stock worn smooth from years of use. Scope fine-tuned to my eye alone. I laid it out on the bench. No one spoke. They just watched. The lead instructor finally approached, his boots crunching slow, careful steps. His face wasn't mocking now. It carried something else, hesitation. Respect, maybe. Fear, more likely. Ma'am, he started, we owe you an apology. I raised a hand, stopping him before he could continue. No apology needed. You couldn't have known. His Adam's apple bobbed once as he swallowed. He nodded and stepped back. I returned to the same mat where the laughter had first started. No one dared make a sound this time. I set my rifle down, adjusted my stance, and felt the familiar calm settle over me like a cloak. The canyon winds were shifting again, dancing across the valley in erratic pulses. Tricky currents. Enough to throw off anyone relying on calculators and spotter readouts. I didn't need them. This valley lies, I murmured to myself. But lies have patterns. 3 shots. 3 targets. Each at a different distance. I worked faster than most would think possible, breathing steady, scope already adjusted, fingers moving like second nature. The timer marked 18 seconds between my first round and my last. 3 hits. 3 clean strikes. I broke the rifle down just as quickly, each piece sliding back into its case with practiced ease. When I finally stood, no one was laughing. No one was smirking. They were silent, like they'd just glimpsed something they weren't supposed to. And maybe they had. Because what I carried wasn't a skill you could measure with drills or scores. It was instinct. A language I never wanted to learn, but one that had kept me alive. The kind that left myths behind. The kind they whispered about when they thought no one was listening. The silence after my last shot lingered longer than the echo of the rifle itself. No one packed up their gear. No one moved. It was as if the entire range had turned into a church, and I had just said something sacred without speaking a word. I slid the case shut, locked it, and lifted it by the handle. Every step back toward the lockers sounded too loud in the sudden hush. Behind me, I heard it. One voice, low and cautious. Pull her record. Keys clattered. Someone had already tapped into the secured personnel net. Normally, those files weren't easy to access. But curiosity among professionals is a stubborn thing. I didn't bother turning around. I already knew what they'd find. The screen would flash my name. Hart, Amelia R. Next line, assignment, logistics support, tier 3. After that, page after page of heavy redactions. Top secret tags. Gaps where the truth used to be. But a few lines had always slipped through. They always did. Enough to paint an outline. Wraithline, tier 1 asset. 27 verified eliminations. Distances exceeding 1,200 yards. Status, inactive. Embedded non-combat assignment. For years. That was where the laughter finally died for good. I heard one of the younger shooters mutter, voice shaky. We were mocking an X, tier 1? Another answered, slower, almost reverent. No, we were mocking Wraithline. I didn't need to look at them to feel the weight shift. Respect comes in many forms. Silence is one of them. I reached the gear shed, set my case down, and placed the clipboard back on top like nothing had changed. But inside, something had. The truth is, I hadn't come here to prove anything. I hadn't wanted to pick up their weapon. But when that old spotter shoved the rifle into my hands, The part of me I tried to bury clawed its way back up. It reminded me of the Andes. I never talk about that place. Not to anyone. But sometimes I hear it anyway. Thin wind cutting across jagged stone, air so sharp it scraped your lungs raw. My instructor, Logan Reeve, stood there with me once, pointing across a canyon so wide it seemed to swallow the world. Don't read the wind like numbers, he told me. Read it like breath. I thought he was crazy. Until I wasn't. Until the first time I fired into nothing but silence. No spotter, no gauges. Just echoes bouncing back like answers whispered from the cliffs themselves. That was the day Wraithline was born, and the day Amelia Hart started fading. I came back from those missions with fewer words and steadier hands. Too steady, too quiet. Enough that command decided silence like mine belonged off the field. Safer to hide me in logistics than risk letting me keep speaking the language of wind and echoes. So they put me here, buried me under paperwork. But a grave is still a grave, even if you can walk away from it. I closed my eyes for half a second, hand resting on the scuffed leather of my rifle case. Out on the range, I could still feel their stares. Not hostile anymore. Curious. Uneasy. Like they were starting to wonder if they'd just seen a ghost pick up a weapon and remind them what precision really looked like. By the next morning, the whispers had spread across the base. I didn't have to hear the words to know. It was in the way people glanced at me now, too quick, then away. In the shift of silence when I walked past. In the respect that felt less like admiration and more like unease. Who the hell is she, really? Someone murmured in the chow line. They wouldn't get answers. Not the full ones. Even I didn't let myself think about the last mission often. But that night, lying in the cot of my so-called logistics quarters, the memories came uninvited. It had been in Kandahar province, for years earlier. The kind of op that never makes it into official records because it wasn't supposed to exist in the first place. We'd gone in light, 6 of us total. Target was a mobile command hub tucked into the hills, guarded by fighters with gear they shouldn't have had. Satellite images showed nothing useful. Too much canopy cover. No drones could get through. They sent us because Wraithline didn't need full teams. We carried silence better than we carried maps. I set up alone on a ridge half a click out, my rifle steady, scope glinting faint in the starlight. The wind that night was a knife, shifting directions, carving eddies through the valley below. I tuned into it like I always did, listening more than seeing. At 0200, the others moved. By 0215, they were compromised. I heard the first burst of gunfire echo through the rocks. Shouts in Pashto. Muzzle flashes cutting the dark. My comms erupted with panic. Calls for cover fire, requests for extraction we weren't going to get. Too hot, command radioed back. No support available. I was the only Overwatch. So I spoke in the only language I had left. My first shot cracked through the night, dropping the machine gunner, pinning them down. Second shot clipped their radio operator before he could relay. Third, cleaned through a lantern, throwing half the hillside back into darkness. The others moved through that window, dragging a wounded man between them. Every breath they took, every stumble, I bought with another round. By 0247, I was out of ammo. Not one of my people had died, but one had nearly been left behind. Sergeant Lewis. He'd taken a round through the side, and when the last chopper finally braved the ridge to get us, the crew chief shouted there was no room. Dead weight, someone muttered. Not to me. I carried him to the bird myself, blood soaking into my vest until my boots slipped with it. He lived. Barely. And me? Command buried the mission. Too much heat. Too many questions about what gear the enemy had, where it came from. They marked the op successful, but made it clear I wasn't to deploy again. You're more valuable off the field, they said. You've given enough. Translation, I'd seen too much. Done too much. Best to file me under logistics and let the memory fade. I opened my eyes back in the cot, staring at the ceiling of my quarters. The hum of the base generator carried through the walls. For years of silence. And yet one shot on Dry Creek Valley's range had undone all of it. Now they remembered. Now they whispered again. And part of me, God help me, wasn't sure if I wanted to stop them. The following week, Dry Creek Valley didn't sound the same. The loud boasts, the wagers slammed down on folding tables, the jabs thrown back and forth. All of it had quieted. Not completely gone, but muted, like everyone was suddenly aware someone else might be listening. Me. I walked to the line with my clipboard, just like before. But now heads turned. Recruits straightened their stances when I passed. Instructors lowered their voices. They didn't quite meet my eyes, not directly. Respect and unease make strange companions. The first clue came when Sergeant Clay, the lead trainer, called out during drills. Winds shifting right. Adjust 3 clicks. But before the recruits could move, one of them asked, "Ma'am, do you agree?" Every head swung toward me. I could have stayed quiet. Could have pretended the question wasn't for me. But the truth is, I was tired of pretending. 2 clicks, I said flatly. Not 3. The canyon wall on the left is funneling it back. The recruit adjusted. Fired. Dead hit. Clay's jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. Not out loud. From then on, they watched me more than him. I didn't ask for it. Didn't want it. But it happened anyway. By the 3rd day, a ritual had formed. They'd fire, miss, then glance my way like children waiting for correction. I rarely spoke, only when it mattered, but the silence afterward carried more weight than any lecture. The range wasn't theirs anymore. It was mine, and they knew it. That night, I overheard 2 lieutenants talking near the mess. They reopened her clearance. No way. I saw the order myself. Top access reinstated. Somebody high up wants her back on the grid. I walked past without breaking stride. But inside, the words clanged around like shell casings hitting concrete. Back on the grid. It had been years since anyone used that phrase about me. The next morning, a new recruit joined the program. Fresh-faced, eager, trying too hard to mask nerves with cocky bravado. He sat through the briefing, then asked the question I'd been waiting for. "So," he said loudly, "who's the top shot here?" No one answered. Not the instructors. Not the seasoned snipers. Instead, one by one, they just turned their heads toward me. I didn't lift my eyes from the scope I was already sighting through. The drone above buzzed faintly, its camera zooming in, not on the targets, but on my trigger finger. Because even the system knew. And the new kid learned something no briefing would ever spell out. This range had belonged to men with big voices and bigger egos. Now it belonged to me. They tried to make it official. A stack of papers landed on my desk one morning, stamped with clearance codes I hadn't seen in years. Independent instructor, precision marksmanship. I didn't sign them. Didn't need to. Someone up top had already pushed it through. By the next day, I had 12 recruits standing in a half circle around me on the range, eyes bright, hands twitching with nervous energy. There had been more than 200 names on the wait list. They cut it down to 12, and I cut it down further, choosing not by skill, but by stillness. By who could listen more than they spoke. Marksmanship isn't about muscle memory. It isn't about who can rattle off calculations fastest. It's about listening. So I started them where no one expected. Breath control, meditation, silence. Before you touch a rifle, you need to learn to hear the ground breathe, I told them. They fidgeted at first, confused. Some tried to hide their frustration. Others sneaked glances at each other, as if hoping someone else would admit this felt pointless. But by the 3rd session, their shoulders had dropped. Their eyes had softened. They started noticing things. How the wind carried dust in spirals. How canyon rocks shifted sound. How silence had rhythms. When one of them asked, "Ma'am, is this really part of shooting?" I answered simply, "Great shots are made long before the trigger is pulled." Command sent observers after the first week. Men in pressed uniforms and dark sunglasses, standing with clipboards just far enough away to look official. They didn't say anything, just watched. The students tried to ignore them. I didn't. I made it clear I wasn't putting on a show. When one of the officers finally approached me during a break, asking, "How exactly are you training them?" I gave him the same answer I'd given recruits. "I'm not teaching them to shoot. I'm teaching them to listen." He didn't write that down. Probably didn't know how. By the 2nd week, their progress was undeniable. I let them pick up rifles again, only after they'd proven they could predict a wind shift 5 seconds before it came. I gave them targets at staggered distances. Some missed, of course. Most did. But the misses were different now. Cleaner. Calculated. They weren't spraying rounds and hoping. They were reading the environment, testing instincts against truth. And when one of them landed a hit he never would have dreamed of weeks before, he didn't cheer. He just nodded, breathing steady, like he'd expected it all along. That's when I knew the training was working. Rumors started spreading faster than the wind itself. Other bases called in, asking for access. Pentagon reps came sniffing around with polite offers. We've got openings for someone with your talents. Missions that require. I'm not interested, I cut in. They blinked, surprised. Not interested in what? Going back. Because I wasn't here to pad my tally of confirmed shots. I wasn't here to crawl back into the shadows. I was here to make sure the next generation didn't need me at all. I always knew it was coming. You can train in silence for weeks, months even, but silence doesn't last forever. One day the noise comes, the chaos, and then you find out if the lessons were just theory or if they'll hold under fire. That day came without warning. We were halfway through a session when the sirens cut through Dry Creek Valley. Sharp, urgent, not a drill. Every head turned toward the ridgeline, where smoke bled upward into the blue. A convoy had rolled into an ambush 2 miles east. Not a simulation, real. The kind of incident that usually drew in quick response units. But they were already stretched thin across the sector. Which left us. The range commander's voice came tight over the loudspeaker. All units stand by, possible deployment. Hart, bring your team in. My team. That's what he called them. The 12 recruits I'd only just started molding. They weren't ready for combat. But combat didn't care. I looked at their faces, fear, confusion, sparks of adrenaline. Some already gripping their rifles too tight. Listen to me, I said, my voice low, steady. What you've learned here, it wasn't for theory. This is what it's for. You don't chase the fight. You don't panic. You breathe. You listen. We moved fast, cutting across the desert in 2 transports. I rode up front, eyes on the horizon. The smoke grew thicker, darker. When we reached the ridge overlooking the kill zone, the ambush came into full view. 2 trucks disabled, pinned between crossfire from camouflaged positions. Returning fire, but blind, shots ricocheting uselessly off stone. The recruits froze at the sight. For a heartbeat, they were just kids with rifles, staring at real death. Positions, I ordered. Something in my tone snapped them back. They scattered across the ridge, dropping into prone, eyes wide but scope steady. Don't look at the targets. Look at the wind. Look at the dust. I lay down beside them, setting my rifle. My scope found the shimmer of heat above a muzzle flash. I didn't fire. I wanted to see who would. One of the recruits exhaled, slow. Finger curled. His shot cracked, echoed, then silence. Down below, one of the ambushers slumped. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't clean. But it was real. Others followed. Shots staggered, imperfect, but purposeful. Each round wasn't panic. It was listening, adjusting, trusting what they'd learned. Within 3 minutes, the ambushers broke, scrambling from their cover. The convoy below held. The recruits looked at me then, eyes searching. Some for approval, some for explanation. I gave them neither. Only 4 words. This is just beginning. The ridge still smelled like burnt powder when we rolled back into base. The recruits rode quiet. Not triumphant, not joking like they might have after a drill. Just quiet. Some stared at their hands as if the rifles were still there, heavy and humming. Others fixed their eyes on the floor, unwilling to meet anyone's gaze. That silence told me everything. They'd learned the first truth of the field. Every shot leaves weight behind. Even the right ones. Especially the right ones. At the gate, command was waiting. Brass polished, uniforms sharp, eyes hungry. Outstanding work, the range commander said, his smile too wide. Quick response saved that convoy. You should be proud. I didn't smile back. They weren't ready. They performed under fire, he countered. That's the best proof of training anyone could ask for. Proof. That was the word he chose. Not survival. Not lives saved. Proof. And just like that, I knew. This wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. That night, reports went out. I didn't have to see them to know. Phrases like Hart's team neutralized ambush and demonstrated unconventional marksmanship methods. Phrases designed to climb ladders and land on the desks of people who saw everything as a resource to be used. By morning, I had 2 new visitors in pressed suits. Not military. Civilian. Pentagon. We've been following your progress, one said, sliding into the chair across from me in the debriefing room. Impressive. Very impressive. The other leaned forward, his tone softer, persuasive. You've built something unique here, Miss Hart. Something scalable. We'd like to formalize it. Deploy it. I stared at them, expression flat. You want to weaponize instinct. We want to replicate results, he corrected smoothly. With the right framework, this could change. No, I cut in. Both blinked, surprised at how quickly I shut it down. I'm not here to mass-produce ghosts. I'm here to make sure the next generation survives. The first man's jaw tightened. The second just nodded slowly, as if he'd expected resistance. This isn't a request, Miss Hart. Sooner or later, someone higher than us will make the decision for you. Better you cooperate now. They left the room with polite smiles, but the air felt heavier after they were gone. Later, in the quiet of my quarters, I opened my old leather case. Not the rifle this time, the journal tucked beside it. Logan Reeves' logbook, pages worn thin from years of notes. Wind patterns, breath rhythms, sound maps. He'd passed it to me with one promise. You'll know when to give it to someone else. For years, I hadn't touched it. Couldn't. But after what I saw on the ridge, after watching my recruits shift from students to survivors in a heartbeat, I knew the time was getting closer. And I also knew something else. Command wasn't going to let me stay in the shadows anymore. My silence had been protection once. Now it was bait. The next week, Command tried to fold me into their system. Briefings, protocol binders, offers disguised as orders. Every day another official suggestion slid across my desk, each one sharpening into a demand. Your methods need documentation. Your recruits must be reassigned under central command. This program belongs to the Army, not to you. I listened. I nodded. And then I walked back out to the range and ignored every word. Because the truth was simple. If I gave them my methods, they'd gut them, turn them into a checklist, mass-produce what was never meant to be manufactured. And the soul of it, the silence, the instinct, would be lost. So I kept training my 12 in secret ways. At night, after the official sessions ended, I gathered them again. No records, no observers, just us under the desert stars. Forget the manuals, I told them. Forget the charts and the calculators. The world doesn't wait for you to pull out a wind table. You listen, you feel, you trust what's around you. I taught them how to hear pressure shifts in the scrape of dust, how to judge distance by how heat shimmered above stone, how to use the pause between echoes as a clock for their breath. They learned faster than I expected. Maybe because they knew this wasn't just training anymore. It was survival. One night, one of the recruits, Santos, the youngest, finally asked what none of them had dared. Ma'am, why aren't you in charge of all this? Why hide out here? I met his eyes. He had the kind of raw honesty that made lying pointless. Because command doesn't want a person, I said quietly. They want a weapon. And weapons don't get to choose who pulls the trigger. He didn't speak again. None of them did. But I saw it settle into their faces like stone, the understanding that they weren't just learning to shoot. They were learning how not to be used. The pushback came sooner than I'd hoped. 2 colonels arrived in person, flanked by MPs. Their message was clear. The program was no longer mine. Effective immediately, the recruits were to be reassigned. My role reduced to advisor. I didn't argue. Not openly. I signed the papers they shoved under my nose. I saluted when they demanded it. I stepped aside, just like they thought I would. But later that night, I met my 12 on the far edge of the valley, away from lights, where the desert swallowed sound. They'll take you soon, I told them. Try to use you. Bend you into their molds. Their eyes burned in the dark, each one locked on me. Don't let them, I said. What I've taught you, keep it quiet. Keep it yours. Because silence, real silence, can't be stolen. And in that moment, I knew, whether I stayed or left didn't matter anymore. The legend of Wraithline wasn't mine to carry. It was already theirs. The colonels thought they'd won. They stripped my title, reassigned my recruits, stamped everything with the seal of bureaucracy. To them, it was over, my silence folded back into the files, my students absorbed into the system. But legends don't vanish because someone writes inactive on a form. They spread. Within 48 hours, word of Dry Creek Valley had already crossed 3 bases. Whispers in mess halls, stories in barracks, some wild, some close to truth. They all ended the same way, with the name they thought they'd buried. Wraithline. On the range, my recruits, my 12, stood taller now. Even as new instructors barked at them, even as the system tried to press them back into its molds, I saw it. The silence, the instinct, the refusal to be shaped into weapons for someone else's hand. They carried me forward without needing me beside them. And that was enough. I packed my case one final time. Rifle, journal, nothing else. When I passed the firing line, the new recruits looked up. None dared speak. But they watched. All of them watched. And then something happened I'll never forget. One by one, every shooter lowered their rifle. Not to quit, not to protest, but to breathe, to listen. Just for a moment, the valley went still. They weren't imitating the colonels. They weren't following the manual. They were following me. I walked past without breaking stride. No farewell speeches. No goodbyes. At the edge of the valley, the desert wind curled around me, tugging at my sleeves, carrying echoes across the stone. I paused, listening the way Logan Reeve once taught me. It whispered the same truth it always had. Silence is its own kind of voice. I smiled, faint, unseen. Then I kept walking. Because Dry Creek Valley wasn't theirs anymore. It never had been. It was mine. And everyone who ever picked up a rifle there would know it.